On a stormlit night at Dallas Airport, a war-scarred officer and his faithful German shepherd stumble upon a suitcase no one dares to claim. What secret could be so urgent that it makes a brave dog whimper and a hardened man break the rules? How far would you go if you thought innocent lives were hidden in the shadows, waiting for a second chance? Could one act of courage unravel a web of lies and lead to hope where none should exist? Don't look away. What happens next might change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and the silent bond between human and animal. Stay with us to discover the incredible truth as this journey unfolds. The city of Dallas was cloaked in the gentle chill of early spring, the air heavy with the scent of rain that had passed a few hours before. High above the glowing labyrinth of highways and sparkling glass towers, clouds drifted lazily beneath the fading starlight, and the distant hum of airplanes was a constant lullaby. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, sprawling and relentless in its bustle, pulsed with the life of 1,000 stories, crossing paths under artificial suns. Here, the world never truly slept. At the heart of this sleepless machine, Officer David Walker moved with a quiet purpose. At 41, David was a man shaped by both war and peace. Tall, just over 6 feet, his frame was lean but solid, with the posture of someone trained never to slouch, never to drop his guard. His skin carried the sun-etched tan of long Texas summers and foreign deserts, and a faded scar traced his left temple, half hidden by cropped brown hair. His face, with its firm jaw and thoughtful blue eyes, suggested gravity, but those who knew him saw the gentle patience beneath the stoic surface. David's gait was steady, his boots making little sound on the polished floor as he walked the dim-lit corridors of Terminal C. He wore his dark blue uniform, neatly the badge above his heart, gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights, and around his neck hung a silver chain, a small paw-shaped pendant, a token from his daughter, the only thing that always brought a faint private smile to his lips. Beside David patted his partner Shadow, a 5-year-old German shepherd of imposing stature. Shadow's thick coat, black along his spine and neck, melded into warm browns on his legs and cheeks, the fur glossy from meticulous care. His eyes, deep amber and keen, flicked constantly between the crowds, and his handler ever alert for danger or distress. Shadow's broad head and square muzzle gave him an air of dignified strength, but a faint scar curled beneath the fur of his left foreleg, a memento from the chaos of a hurricane rescue 2 years before. With every stride, Shadow radiated purpose, nose, twitching ears, swiveling tail, poised as if every heartbeat was another oath to protect. To outsiders, he was a marvel of discipline and intelligence, but for David, Shadow was salvation, steadfast loyal, and the anchor that had pulled him from darker days when memories of Afghanistan clung too tightly. Tonight, the airport hummed with its usual orchestration announcements, echoed in multiple languages, suitcases rattled along conveyor belts, and the scent of coffee wafted from a late-night kiosk. But beneath the surface, tension simmered unseen by travelers, but familiar to those who kept vigil here every night. The air outside still felt damp, the parking lots shimmering with the memory of rain, while inside the bright light denied the hour. As David and Shadow began their patrol, the officer scanned every face with practiced calm. It was a dance of vigilance, watching for the unhurried, the anxious, the eyes that lingered too long, or the hands that clutched bags too tightly. He greeted the occasional staff member with a nod. A custodian, Mr. Luis Morales, paused briefly. Luis, a man in his 50s with warm brown skin and tired eyes, had cleaned these floors for nearly 20 years. Even in Officer Walker, he said, his accent rich with his Mexican heritage shoulders, stooped but smile genuine. David returned the greeting, noting the man's slow, methodical movements, and the way his hands trembled just a bit, old injuries perhaps, or simply the weight of the years. For Luis, every shift was another quiet act of resilience. At 11:32 p.m., as they circled near the international baggage claim, Shadow's head snapped up. The shepherd's muscles tensed, hackles rising his breath, coming in a short, excited huff. David paused, hand resting gently on the dog's broad shoulders. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his tone low. Shadow's nose worked furiously, his focus drawn to a cluster of suitcases along the wall, dozens of bags from a late flight out of Lima, Peru, the tags still glistening with moisture from the storm outside. There, between a battered red duffel and a glossy green hard case, stood a black suitcase unremarkable at first glance, save for the way Shadow froze before it. His body language changed, no longer the measured professionalism of a working dog, but a subtle growing agitation. Shadow let out a soft, almost plaintive whine circling the suitcase, then began to paw at its base, as if desperately seeking something hidden within. David's pulse quickened. In all his time with Shadow, he'd learned to trust the dog's instincts implicitly. They had faced false alarms before forgotten food, misplaced perfumes, the odd shipment of cheese. But Shadow's posture was different now. The dog's tail stiffened, and his usually calm eyes flickered with unease. David knelt down, examining the suitcase. It was a sturdy modern model, black polycarbonate, no external tags except for a single faded barcode. There were faint scratches along one side, and as David inspected it more closely, he noticed a peculiar row of minuscule holes near the zipper seam, almost imperceptible unless you looked for them. "Dispatch, this is Officer Walker at Terminal C baggage claim," David murmured into his radio. "Possible suspicious item, requesting secondary inspection." He listened for the static-laced reply, watching as Shadow continued to whine and paw, urgency rising in the dog's movements. Within minutes, backup arrived. Officer Jenna Blackwell stepped into view, a woman in her mid-30s, tall and athletic, her dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail, brown eyes sharp and appraising. Jenna was known for her quick wit and unflappable calm, in emergencies traits honed over a decade working the midnight shift. Her presence was reassuring. She moved with the controlled precision of someone who'd seen every kind of trouble and never let it shake her. Jenna knelt beside David, examining the suitcase with practiced care. "Looks clean from here," she whispered, "but that dog's got better instincts than half our tech." A small crowd began to gather, the curious watching from a safe distance. David gestured for space, his voice firm but polite. "Please stand back, airport security. Just a routine check." He looked to Luis, who hovered nearby, mop forgotten. "Luis, can you help clear the area?" The custodian nodded, shepherding onlookers away, with a soft but persistent authority. His presence, while quiet, always commanded respect. The suitcase was transferred carefully to the security inspection room, where it would be opened and scanned under controlled conditions. Shadow paced restlessly outside the glass window, unable to tear his gaze from the case. Inside, David watched as the inspection tech, Marcus Hayes, a stocky man in his late 20s, with sandy hair and wire-rimmed glasses, methodically ran his scanners over the case. Marcus was affable but meticulous, notorious for following every protocol to the letter, a habit developed after one close call in his first year that left him sleepless for weeks. As the machines hummed, Marcus frowned, brow furrowed beneath the glow of the monitor. "No explosives, no narcotics, no obvious contraband," he muttered. "But there's something dense in here. Not metal, not electronics. Strange." Jenna folded her arms, glancing from the monitor to David. "That's odd. No one's claimed it." David shook his head. "Not a word. Shadow's never acted like this before." Marcus shrugged, unease written plainly across his face. "We should log it for secondary analysis. Might be an exotic animal or... I don't know. Whatever it is, it's alive. That's my guess." As the hours ticked by, paperwork was filed, the case locked in the holding room, and the airport's routines closed back in around them. David couldn't shake the weight of unease. Shadow lay at his feet, head on his paws, eyes never leaving the door to the inspection area. Outside, the wind began to rise again, rattling the glass as the memory of the storm returned. Somewhere in the warren of corridors and terminals, the secret of the black suitcase waited silent and unresolved. By dawn, Dallas-Fort Worth was waking once more. But for David Walker Shadow, and those who kept watch in the night, a new mystery had taken root. A puzzle that, for reasons he could not yet name, felt as urgent and personal as any he'd ever faced. The morning crept into Dallas with a hesitant golden hush streaking across the tarmac and glass windows of Dallas-Fort Worth like a gentle promise. Inside Terminal C, the night's tension seemed to linger in the recycled air. David Walker hadn't slept. He sat at his desk, jaw tight, staring at the paperwork for the unclaimed black suitcase now locked away in the security holding room. His navy shirt hung rumpled on his tall, angular frame, and the light glinted off the faint scar at his temple. At his feet, Shadow dozed, but his sleep was restless. The big German shepherd's ears flicked at every distant sound, muscles taut even in repose, as if he too sensed unfinished business. The official inspection carried out with all the caution of procedure had yielded nothing actionable. No explosives, no narcotics, no smuggled currency. The security technician Marcus Hayes had been apologetic but firm. Just some dense organic material, maybe clothing, maybe craft goods. No threat, Officer Walker. Even Jenna Blackwell, the athletic razor-focused officer who had assisted them in the night, tried to reassure him, her brown eyes kind, despite her exhaustion. Maybe the dog just picked up on some old scent, David. You know how strange airports can be. But Shadow was never wrong, not once in 3 years. And this time, the dog's agitation wouldn't let up. Each time David walked by the holding area, Shadow would whine, nose pressed hard against the steel door tail, rigid. Across the city, the first shift at the Dallas Animal Aid Center was beginning. Jenny Harper moved briskly through the narrow hallways, her blonde hair tied messily at the nape of her neck, a few wisps escaping as usual to frame her youthful face. At 29, Jenny was all quick movements and gentle hands, her petite form often dwarfed by the big crates and stacks of donated pet food she organized daily. Her gray eyes, lively and deeply empathetic, scanned every cage and corner. This morning the center was busy with the usual stream of abandoned animals and anxious volunteers, but a sudden call from airport maintenance caught her attention. There's an injured stray near the parking garage limping bad. Might be a hit and run, or maybe something else. The caller, a young groundskeeper named Alex, explained, his voice uncertain. Alex was new, barely out of college, dark-haired, and still a little awkward in his official orange vest. But Jenny liked his sincerity and his way of speaking softly to the animals. Jenny grabbed her emergency kit, her well-worn sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she hurried out. Outside, the air was cool and sweet, tinged with the oily tang of jet fuel. The maintenance lot behind Terminal B was quieter than the terminal, its chain-link fence casting a patchwork of shadow and sun over the cracked concrete. Alex was already waiting, nervously kneeling beside a shivering, battered orange tabby. The cat was thin, his matted fur patchy, and a nick cut deep into his right ear. He blinked up at Jenny with wary sea-glass eyes. "Poor thing must have been hiding here all night," Alex said, running a hand through his messy hair, concern written plain on his young face. "He won't let anyone get close." Jenny crouched, speaking gently, her voice a soothing melody. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now." She coaxed the cat closer with a bit of tuna from her kit. As he finally limped forward, she noticed something odd, a faint fresh indentation around his neck, as if a collar had recently been removed. Her fingers found sticky residue, a smell that was oddly familiar but hard to place sharp musky, not unlike the scent of the suitcase she had sometimes encountered when picking up rescue animals from cargo shipments. She gently examined his injured leg, her touch feather light. "He's got a bad cut here," she murmured, "and this mark on his neck, it's not old." Alex looked uneasy. "You think someone dumped him out here?" Jenny glanced back at the looming bulk of the airport. "Or maybe he escaped from somewhere he shouldn't have been," she said almost to herself. Back inside the airport, David was in the middle of a terse discussion with his supervisor, Lieutenant Brian Wallace. Wallace, a man in his early 50s, exuded the gruff, practical energy of someone who'd worked security since before most of the younger officers were born. Stocky with thinning silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, his sharp gray eyes missed little, but he had a reputation for sticking to rules above all else. "I'm telling you, Sir Shadow won't leave it alone. He's still anxious every time we go near that room," David insisted, standing rigidly at parade rest in front of the desk. Wallace sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You've already had the suitcase scanned twice, Walker. I can't keep pulling staff and resources for a dog's hunch. Protocol says we wait 72 hours. If it's not claimed, then animal control can look at it all right." David's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his tone even. "And if whatever's in there doesn't survive 72 hours? Wallace's gaze softened a fraction just for a heartbeat. "I know you've got good instincts, but we do this by the book." The older man's words were final. David left the office, frustration boiling beneath his calm. Unable to shake his sense of unease, David took Shadow for another circuit of the airport, lingering near the security room. Each time, Shadow whined, ears-flat gaze fixed on the door. As they passed the food court, a familiar face called out. Luis Morales, the night custodian with his ever-present mop and warm brown eyes, gave David a tired but encouraging smile. "Don't let them brush you off, officer. Dogs know things we don't." David smiled in spite of himself, grateful for even the smallest support. Meanwhile, Jenny brought the injured cat, who she quickly dubbed Sam, to the center's clinic. The tabby was calmer now, wrapped snug in a faded blue towel, his gaze more trusting. As she cleaned his wounds, Jenny couldn't shake the feeling there was a connection between this battered stray and something larger. She remembered seeing animal control officers at the airport a few days ago, removing cages from a delayed cargo shipment. Was it possible Sam had escaped from one of those shipments? Or worse, had he been left behind during something illegal? Her supervisor at the center, Mrs. Helen Brooks, was a woman in her late 60s with a strong presence. Tall, with silver hair, always coiled in a bun, she wore a crisp blouse and tailored pants, even on weekends. Her blue eyes, though kind, had a piercing directness that made lying impossible. She peeked into the clinic, voice gentle but firm. "Another stray from the airport." Jenny nodded. "Yes, and something's not right. This one's scared, but it feels different, like he's seen things." Mrs. Brooks looked at the mark around the cat's neck, her lips pursing. "Document everything, and if you notice anything else unusual, call me first. There's been talk of suspicious animal shipments lately." As the day wore on, David found himself sitting in the break room, Shadow's great head resting on his knee. He scrolled through messages, searching for any updates about the suitcase. Instead, an email caught his eye, a notice about a missing exotic animal shipment from a South American cargo flight sent to all airport security and animal aid agencies in the region. The animals involved 2 bobcat kittens and a rare South American wildcat. The description of the cages matched what Jenny remembered seeing earlier in the week. David's mind raced. Could the black suitcase be connected? He rose abruptly, heart thudding, and dialed the Animal Aid Center. Jenny answered, voice bright, but edged with worry. David introduced himself and quickly explained the situation. "You have an injured cat that turned up at the airport?" he asked. With a mark on his neck, Jenny described Sam's condition, the strange scent, and her suspicions. They agreed to meet that afternoon to compare notes. As she ended the call, Jenny cradled Sam, determination burning in her eyes. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the budding magnolia trees along the airport's edge. The sun glinted off the endless rows of cars, and within the complex web of terminals and tunnels, a single black suitcase sat quiet, ominous, waiting. Neither David nor Jenny could yet see the full web of connections. But now, a battered stray, a persistent dog, and 2 stubborn, compassionate humans were moving steadily toward the truth, one that would shake the quiet order of their lives and bring unlikely allies together. The Texas afternoon arrived with a restless heat that shimmered over the glass and steel of Dallas-Fort Worth. Though spring was barely settling in, the airport hummed with travelers, but for David Walker, time seemed to slow as he watched the security monitors in a small, windowless room tucked away from the main concourse. He'd changed into a fresh uniform, yet the stubble on his jaw and the determined set of his shoulders betrayed his sleepless night. Shadow sat close by, tail curled neatly, his black and tan fur immaculate, and his gaze intent on every flicker of movement. David's mind whirled with questions about the suitcase and the agitated dog at his side. He glanced at his phone, reading a text from Jenny Harper, the young volunteer from the Animal Rescue Center. They had arranged to meet at the staff parking lot behind Terminal B, where Jenny would bring the injured cat for David to see. He appreciated her initiative and her willingness to get involved, even if she was only 5'3" with hair the color of wheat and a resilience in her gray eyes that outmatched most police officers he'd known. Jenny's small frame was nearly hidden by the loose blue jacket she wore. Her practical jeans and sneakers smudged with traces of iodine from that morning's animal treatments. Cradled in her arms, wrapped in a faded towel, Sam the tabby looked less fearful now, his tail twitching, but his body relaxed in her careful hands. The moment David reached the meeting spot, Shadow pulled forward, nose quivering. The dog circled Jenny, sniffing her shoes, and the cat, before giving a short, satisfied bark. "He's just saying hello," David reassured her. "He knows you're here to help." Jenny smiled, her nerves easing, and carefully handed Sam to David for inspection. Up close, the cat's fur revealed details Jenny had missed: faint red indentations running in a neat line around his neck, as if some small, tight collar or band had pressed there for weeks. The fur on his hindquarters was clumped and sparse, and beneath one paw, a trace of bluish ink stained his pad, something David recognized as cargo marker dye usually used to track live animal shipments. Jenny noticed his expression. "What is it?" David showed her the mark, his tone grave. "He didn't just wander here. He came in as part of something else. We're dealing with more than a stray." Shadow let out a soft whine, drawing their attention. The German shepherd's ears stood straight, his gaze focused on the distant loading bay. David followed his stare, his own pulse quickened as intuition sharpened. "Shadow's onto something," he said quietly, glancing at Jenny. "Do you have time to come with us?" Jenny nodded, and they set off in tandem, Shadow leading the way, David alert, Jenny following close with Sam, clutched to her chest. They made their way through the maze of service corridors and baggage halls, the air cooler, and tinged with the metallic scent of oil and distant jet fuel. At the end of a dim hallway, a tall woman with a clipboard stepped from a supply closet, nearly bumping into them. She was in her early 40s with chestnut hair cropped short around her sharp cheekbones. Her name badge read, Sarah Mitchell, Terminal Logistics. Sarah stood nearly 6 feet her build, slender but athletic, and her green eyes flickered with quick calculation as she assessed the unlikely trio. "Lost?" she asked, her voice crisp and low. David shook his head. "Actually, we're looking for baggage records. I need to check the status of an unclaimed suitcase from yesterday's Lima flight." Sarah's lips quirked in a half-smile. "You and half the staff today. That carousel's been nothing but trouble." Her tone was sardonic, but there was a warmth in the way she looked at Shadow. She extended a hand, letting the dog sniff her knuckles. "Good dog," she murmured, softening. David explained briefly about the suitcase and the cat, careful to mention only what was necessary. Sarah, pragmatic and a little weary from years of airport grind, nodded along her manner, brisk but not unfriendly. She led them into a side office packed with filing cabinets and monitors. "I'll check the log. Most of those bags are scanned and moved after 12 hours, but sometimes paperwork gets missed." She worked quickly, her long fingers flying over the keyboard. Jenny watched Sarah with quiet interest. There was a sadness to her, a gravity that made sense when you knew she'd once worked as a first responder during Hurricane Harvey, a fact revealed by a faded Red Cross pin on her lanyard and by the slight limp in her step. People said Sarah had lost a friend in the floods, and though she rarely talked about it, the story clung to her. The computer beeped. Sarah frowned. "There's a manifest mismatch. One unregistered bag from the Lima flight marked for animal inspection, but the paperwork vanished in the handover." She glanced up, her green eyes alert. "That's odd. I'll forward the file to security and flag the footage for you." David thanked her, and they moved on, but not before Sarah bent to scratch Shadow behind the ears, her expression softening further. "Be careful," she said quietly. "Airports are full of secrets." Outside, as they rounded a corner, Jenny spoke in a low voice. "Do you think the suitcase is dangerous?" David hesitated. "I don't know, but it's not routine." At that moment, Shadow stopped short, pawing at a side door marked Authorized Personnel Only. David swiped his badge, and the heavy metal door groaned open. Inside, the forgotten baggage room was stacked with unclaimed suitcases, crates, and boxes, all arranged in tidy rows. Shadow moved directly to a dark blue trunk in the far corner, whining insistently. As they approached, a faint mewling sound reached their ears, so quiet it could have been mistaken for pipes rattling. Jenny's eyes widened. "Listen," she whispered. David and Jenny moved closer. From within the trunk, there were unmistakable noises, the scuffle of claws, the weak pleading cries of animals. David's heart hammered in his chest. "Help me open it," he said. Together they released the latches. Inside, huddled in a makeshift nest of dirty straw, were 2 tiny bobcat kittens, trembling and weak, their fur matted and patchy. Their blue eyes blinked fearfully in the harsh fluorescent light. Jenny gasped, her instincts taking over. She checked the kittens for injuries, her hands sure, despite the urgency. "They're barely alive," she said, voice trembling. "We need to get them out of here now." David nodded, already calling dispatch for emergency animal services. As Jenny wrapped the kittens in her jacket, David noticed more, a tag on the inside of the trunk, stamped with a South American export code, and chillingly a set of small plastic bands like the one that had been around Sam's neck. "This is a trafficking operation," he murmured. "Someone is smuggling wild animals through regular baggage." While waiting for help, Jenny gently laid Sam next to the kittens. The tabby licked one of their ears and curled protectively around them, a faint rumble in his throat. Shadow lay down beside the group, his huge body forming a protective wall. It was a tableau of unlikely guardians, man, woman, dog, and cat, all keeping watch over 2 lives at the edge of hope. Within 15 minutes, a new face appeared, Dr. Hannah Lee, a petite veterinarian in her mid-30s, with expressive brown eyes and a quiet authority. Her black hair was cropped in a practical bob, and her scrubs bore the logo of the Dallas Wildlife Response Unit. She moved quickly, her soft voice instantly calming. "Let's get them oxygen and fluids," she directed. As she examined the bobcat kittens, her expression grew grave. If you hadn't found them now, they wouldn't have lasted the hour. David met Jenny's eyes, determination and relief mingled. Shadow pressed against his leg eyes, never leaving the kittens. The pieces of the puzzle had begun to align. Somewhere, someone was using the busy chaos of Dallas-Fort Worth to smuggle rare animals in and out of the country. But now, thanks to a persistent dog, a battered stray, and the compassion of strangers, the first signal for help had been answered. The sky above Dallas faded from cobalt to gray as evening approached, shadows lengthening over the airport's sprawling wings. Inside Terminal C, David Walker's nerves felt as taut as the leash in his hand. He glanced at the message from Jenny. She and Dr. Hannah Lee had moved the 2 frail bobcat kittens and Sam the orange tabby to the animal aid van, now waiting just outside the employee entrance. In the controlled chaos of the afternoon, no one seemed to notice David slipping out of the security office with Shadow by his side, heart pounding with both dread and hope. David had made up his mind he could no longer wait for official permission. He strode down the corridor, his tall frame tense navy shirt now creased from hours of worry, blue eyes hard with determination. The memory of the kitten's hollow mews in that forgotten trunk haunted him, echoing louder than any threat of disciplinary action. At the secure holding room, David swiped his access card and ushered Shadow inside. The German Shepherd, regal and steady, immediately sniffed along the perimeter before stopping in front of the black suitcase, the one that had kept him restless for nights. Shadow whined and pressed his nose to the zipper tail, stiff eyes pleading for action. The room's harsh fluorescent lights cast David's reflection onto the suitcase's glossy shell as he worked the lock open. There was no one else around, just the quiet hum of cooling vents and the steady, insistent breathing of his canine partner. With hands steady but breath unsteady, David lifted the lid. The stench hit him first, a raw, metallic odor of urine and fear mixed with the sharp tang of disinfectant. Inside, 2 tiny bobcat kittens curled together, limp and listless, their spotted fur-matted blue eyes barely open. One, smaller than the other, shuddered with each shallow breath, while its sibling lay frighteningly still. Their delicate paws bore red indentations from plastic bands now snapped and discarded at the bottom of the suitcase. David barely had time to register the horror before Shadow let out a sharp bark, alerting him to a sudden change. The smaller bobcat's chest began to rise and fall with alarming irregularity, the movement growing weaker. David's training and instincts merged in a rush. He scooped the kittens into the towel Jenny had given him earlier, wrapping them securely and calling her on his radio. "Get Hannah quick! One of the kittens is crashing. We're coming to you now." He bundled the animals against his chest, Shadow pressing close, and slipped out the side door into the humid Texas dusk. Outside, Jenny waited anxiously beside the white van, her blonde hair pulled back and her practical jacket flecked with stains from the day's rescues. Dr. Hannah Lee, small but resolute, prepared her field kit on the fold-out table in the back. Her dark eyes swept the kittens the moment David arrived, her gentle hands instantly at work. "Bring them here fast," she instructed, her voice controlled and calm. Jenny helped settle the kittens on a pile of clean towels, her heart in her throat. As Hannah assessed the kittens, she issued orders with brisk confidence. "Jenny, I need you to hold the larger one still. David, can you keep the smaller one's airway open? He's severely dehydrated and hypothermic." She fished an oxygen mask from her kit, attaching it to a tiny, trembling nose. Shadow, sensing the urgency, stationed himself at Hannah's side, his big brown eyes vigilant and his tail flicking with anxiety. When the smaller kitten's breathing faltered, Hannah pressed her stethoscope to its fragile chest and whispered, "Not yet, little one. Not yet." The kitten's pulse stuttered, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Suddenly, Shadow nudged Hannah's arm and let out a low, urgent whine as if pleading for her to try something more. Hannah, catching his gaze, switched to chest compressions, letting David carefully provide gentle puffs of air through a tiny mask. Jenny murmured soft encouragement, her gray eyes brimming with unshed tears. After a tense minute, The kitten's chest gave a stronger heave, a gasp, a fragile promise of survival. "He's back," Hannah whispered, relief washing over her face. Jenny hugged Shadow, burying her face in his fur. "Good boy, Shadow. You knew?" The van fell silent, except for the soft purrs and shallow breaths of the rescued animals. Dr. Hannah Lee wiped her brow, then gave instructions. "We have to get them to the center now, but they're stable for transport. Jenny ride in the back with the kittens. David, you take the lead. Let's make sure no one stops us." As they loaded up, a new voice called from the employee lot, a tall, burly man with a red beard wearing a faded airport maintenance uniform. He introduced himself as Greg Stanton, mid-40s, with a booming laugh that seemed at odds with the worried furrow of his brow. Heard there was trouble. Need an escort? He offered, surprising them all with his willingness to help. Greg's reputation as the go-to guy for after-hours repairs was well known. He was quiet around strangers, but fiercely protective of animals, a trait born of his childhood on a small Texas ranch. With Greg leading the way in his battered golf cart, the small convoy slipped past the airport perimeter, arriving at the Dallas Wildlife Response Center just as the last light faded from the sky. Inside, Mrs. Helen Brooks, tall, composed, her silver hair perfectly pinned, stood ready with a team of vet techs. She took in the scene at a glance, her blue eyes sharp. "Let's move, every minute counts." Hannah, Jenny, and David rushed the kittens to the exam table. Shadow and Sam remained nearby, silent witnesses to the drama. Shadow pressed close to Jenny's leg, while Sam, the orange tabby, watched the kittens with quiet concern. While Hannah and Helen stabilized the kittens, David called Lieutenant Wallace to update him, bracing for a reprimand. To his surprise, Wallace's tone was less angry than exhausted. "Just bring me all the evidence you've got, Walker. If you're right, we're looking at something big." As he hung up, David caught sight of Jenny sitting on the floor beside Shadow, her jacket wrapped around the kitten's carrier. Her gray eyes met his, gratitude and fatigue mingling there. "You did the right thing, David," she whispered. Later, as the kittens slept in an incubator, the team gathered in the small staff kitchen. Jenny curled up in a battered armchair, Hannah reviewing medical notes, David leaning against the counter with Shadow sprawled at his feet. Greg, the maintenance man, poured coffee for everyone, his huge hands gentle as he added sugar to Jenny's mug. "You're all heroes, you know," he said, voice rough. "Those kittens got a fighting chance because of you." The mood was somber, but hopeful. For the first time since the ordeal began, David allowed himself a faint smile. Shadow's ears perked at the sound, and the big dog nudged his hand. "We're not done yet," David murmured, but hope had taken root. Night deepened over Dallas, pressing quietly against the windows of the Dallas Wildlife Response Center. Inside the softly lit recovery room, hope flickered in the rise and fall of the two rescued bobcat kittens' tiny chests. Jenny Harper sat cross-legged on the linoleum floor beside their incubator, blonde hair coming loose from her ponytail and blue jacket draped over her shoulders. Her gray eyes, usually filled with bustling energy, were now gentle and intent as she bottle-fed the weaker kitten, her movements practiced and soothing. Shadow, the German shepherd, lay stretched protectively at Jenny's side, his massive head close to the incubator, as if standing guard through the long, uncertain hours. In a quiet moment, the orange tabby Sam slinked over and sat warily across from Shadow. For a beat, the air tensed with feline canine uncertainty. But Shadow, sensing the cat's skittishness, offered a slow, respectful blink and nudged a plush toy toward Sam with his nose. The cat hesitated, then batted at the toy, and within minutes the tension eased. Jenny smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "Looks like you've got a friend now, big guy," she whispered, scratching Shadow behind the ear. Sam, for his part, circled close and curled up beside Shadow, finding a rare sense of safety. Elsewhere in the center, David Walker moved through the halls with a growing sense of purpose. The exhaustion that had clung to his tall, broad-shouldered frame for days was now replaced by a sharper, more focused determination. He met with Dr. Hannah Lee in the small administrative office, reviewing the kitten's health records and recent animal trafficking alerts. Hannah, her neat black bob slightly tousled, wore dark-rimmed glasses tonight, her brown eyes full of both concern and quiet steel. "Their vital signs are improving," she reported. "You got to them just in time." David nodded, gratitude plain in his blue eyes, but his mind was already elsewhere. As soon as the kittens had stabilized, he had reached out to the authorities, sending a coded summary of what they had discovered to the FBI's regional office. He'd included every detail: the unclaimed suitcase, the cargo dye on Sam's paws, the animal import tags, and the suspicious paperwork that Sarah Mitchell, the sharp-eyed logistics supervisor, had helped flag. Now he awaited a response. It came just after midnight. A black government SUV rolled up the gravel driveway, headlights cutting through the gloom. Stepping out was Supervisory Special Agent Mark Whitman, a man of few words in his early 50s with a thick build, salt and pepper hair, cropped short, and piercing gray eyes. Whitman wore a trim navy suit, his tie askew from a long day. But there was nothing tired in his demeanor. He shook David's hand firmly. "Walker, Whitman, FBI. Let's get to it." They gathered in the center staff lounge. Jenny brewed coffee, her eyes darting with curiosity and worry. Whitman's voice was low but commanding as he began. "The serial number you found in the suitcase lines up with a batch of travel goods shipped from Venezuela through a freight forwarder in Bogota. But here's the twist: the shipment was declared as educational wildlife exhibits and supposedly sponsored by the Global Wild Trust Foundation, a registered nonprofit in Houston." He paused, studying the room. Except Wild Trust has a checkered reputation. Their public face is wildlife education and rescue. Behind closed doors, they've been flagged for mismanagement and irregular customs paperwork. Jenny frowned, piecing it together. "So someone used the foundation as a cover to move animals illegally?" Whitman nodded. "That's our working theory. The foundation's director, a businessman named Frank Morgan, has ties to multiple shipping companies and connections that let him evade scrutiny. He's charming, dresses like a philanthropist, mid-40s, expensive suits, silver hair always seen at fundraising galas. But we suspect he's running more than just a charity." Jenny's hands tightened on her coffee mug. Shadow sat up, ears pricked as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Dr. Hannah Lee glanced between the faces, her voice quietly urgent. "These kittens, Sam, and who knows how many others, they're victims. But if we can link Morgan or his people to this suitcase, we might save more." Whitman's eyes softened just for a moment. "That's why I'm here. But I need your records photos and anything else unusual you noticed." Jenny quickly recounted the cat's neck wounds and the odd scent on his fur, while David described the dye and the fake paperwork flagged by Sarah. Meanwhile, out in the main hall, Sam and Shadow grew bolder in their tentative friendship. Shadow, usually reserved around other animals, allowed the orange tabby to curl against his side, a low, contented rumble escaping the cat's throat. In the calm, Jenny found a moment to let herself breathe. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the unlikely pair, sending it to Mrs. Helen Brooks, her mentor, who replied, "Sometimes healing starts with small, unexpected friendships." Whitman lingered after the interview, his demeanor softening just a touch when Shadow came to greet him. He knelt and scratched the big shepherd under the chin, a rare smile appearing on his face. "I had a dog like you once," he murmured, glancing up at David. "Lost him on a case gone wrong. Keep this one close." There was something in his voice, a memory of grief, an echo of old loss that resonated with David's own haunted past. As dawn crept up, the group huddled in the recovery room, reviewing notes and building their case. Outside, Greg Stanton, the burly maintenance man, arrived with fresh supplies and a tray of homemade muffins, his faded baseball cap perched at an awkward angle. "Figured you all could use a boost," he said gruffly. But there was warmth in his tired blue eyes. Greg's presence brought a sense of quiet reassurance. He rarely spoke of his own past, but Jenny knew he'd lost his childhood ranch to a wildfire, and since then he found solace in helping both people and animals survive hard times. Jenny dozed briefly in the chair beside the kittens, Sam's purring and Shadow's steady breathing lulling her to sleep. David stood watch at the window, blue eyes catching the faintest light on the horizon, mind racing with both new hope and old worries. Together in the hush of the morning, their small team felt a sense of purpose, knowing that beneath the foundation's glossy promises, there was a web of cruelty that needed to be torn away. A tense quiet settled over the Dallas Wildlife Response Center, as the sky pressed heavy and dark against its windows, moonlight slicing the quiet grounds in silver. Inside, Jenny Harper moved between the incubators and animal crates, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of medical monitors. Her blonde hair, now hastily pulled into a loose braid, framed her pale, determined face. She wore a sweatshirt one size too big, sleeves rolled up as she checked the vital signs of the two recovering bobcat kittens. Shadow. The loyal German shepherd lay at her feet, gaze sharp, and ears flicking at every sound, his powerful body tensed as if awaiting a signal from some unseen danger. David Walker had settled near the staff lounge, going over notes with Special Agent Whitman, who looked more severe than ever in his Navy suit, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by fatigue. Dr. Hannah Lee, her usually neat black bob, now a bit unruly, brewed coffee at the small kitchenette, sharing quiet words with Jenny about the kitten's condition. Across the room, Greg Stanton unloaded late-night supplies, his large bearded frame hunched to move more quietly, an instinct learned from years of tending nervous livestock. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Shadow stiffened. He let out a low growl, his body sliding silently to the glass doors that opened onto the center's back lot. David noticed instantly standing and signaling for silence. Jenny paused, bottle in hand, watching Shadow's every move. Whitman eased his hand to his concealed weapon. Something outside, he murmured. Shadow growled again, gaze fixed on a narrow gap in the curtains. A moment later, a flicker of movement shadows gliding between the parked vans caught David's eye. He crouched by Shadow, whispering, "What do you see, boy?" Shadow's hackles raised. In that instant, the center's outside floodlights flickered and died, plunging the back lot into darkness. Jenny's heart pounded. She gathered the bobcat kittens Sam the orange tabby and pressed them close, retreating to the windowless medical supply closet. Greg and Hannah joined her, Hannah quietly locking the door behind them. Outside, several figures dressed in dark hooded jackets, faces obscured by masks, slipped from the shadows and moved toward the rear entrance. Shadow barked a warning, sharp and fierce. David radioed for immediate police, backup, his voice low but urgent. Possible break-in, Dallas Wildlife Center. Armed suspects. Request immediate response. Whitman composed an alert motion David toward the main hall. "I'll cover the side, you take the front. They're after the animals." His gray eyes were cold steel, his body language broadcasting readiness born from decades of field work. David nodded, unholstering his own weapon, moving quietly with Shadow beside him. Through the locked glass doors, he could make out 3 masked intruders moving methodically toward the building, tools in hand. In the supply closet, Jenny crouched with the kittens, Shadow's earlier warning echoing in her ears. Hannah reached for a heavy flashlight, her voice hushed but resolute. "If they get in, we defend the animals. Nothing else matters." Greg's massive hands, trembling only slightly, gripped a metal pipe he found in the maintenance cupboard. The first window shattered with a sudden explosive crack. The intruders moved swiftly, disabling cameras, their movements practiced and silent. David, positioned in the shadows, watched as one of them bypassed the simple alarm on the bobcat enclosure. The man's gloved hand reached for the latch. In a blur, Shadow lunged for a storm of motion, teeth bared in a fierce snarl. The intruder staggered back, crashing into a shelf of medical supplies. Shadow pinned him, powerful jaws inches from the man's throat bark reverberating through the center. Another intruder rushed forward, flashlight swinging wildly, but David intercepted him, knocking the tool from his grasp and pinning him against the wall. Whitman, on the other side of the building, caught the third intruder as he tried to slip through a service door, subduing him with the swift efficiency of years spent hunting far more dangerous men. Outside, sirens finally broke the silence. Flashing red and blue lights spilled across the parking lot as local police arrived, moving in coordinated teams. 2 remaining accomplices tried to flee, but Greg, wielding his makeshift metal pipe, blocked their path at the side gate. His presence alone enough to make them falter, until officers tackled them to the ground. Jenny hidden with Hannah, and the animals could hear the muffled struggle and barking. The bobcat kittens whimpered. Sam pressed close, his eyes wide. Hannah murmured soothingly, "It'll be over soon." When the door banged open and David's familiar voice called, "It's safe. Come out." Jenny's legs buckled with relief. She carried the kittens into the hall, where Shadow immediately nuzzled her hand, licking her trembling fingers. Within minutes, the police had handcuffed the intruders, 5 men in total, all mid-30s, lean and hard-eyed, their accents hinting at foreign origins. Under questioning, they revealed little but one dropped a business card bearing the logo of the Global Wild Trust Foundation. Whitman pocketed the evidence, exchanging a knowing glance with David. The center's staff rallied. Greg helped board up the broken window. Dr. Hannah checked the animals, confirming all were safe. Jenny, shaken but resolute, sat on the floor with the kittens, Shadow curled around her. The dog's chest rose and fell in great steadying breaths, his heroism unspoken but felt by everyone in the room. Even Sam, usually wary, crept over to nuzzle Shadow, as if offering his own thanks. As dawn bled, pale pink into the sky, local news vans began to appear drawn by police reports of the thwarted heist. Special Agent Whitman, still buttoned into his wrinkled suit, gave a brief statement to the press crediting the bravery of the Wildlife Center staff, and especially their remarkable canine protector. David stood beside him, his tall frame, still blue eyes, proud but tired. Jenny, in her oversized sweatshirt, smiled for the cameras with a bobcat kitten cradled gently in her arms. Inside, away from the spotlight, Hannah and Greg debriefed quietly over mugs of black coffee. Greg, whose own scars ran deeper than he let on, finally voiced what the whole team felt. "We make a good pack, don't we?" Hannah nodded, her warm brown eyes misty. "Best pack I've ever had." Shadow stretched out in a sunbeam, watched the kittens tumble together, his gaze calm. Sam, now emboldened, batted at the tip of Shadow's tail. The center, though battered, felt lighter, bonded not just by survival, but by the courage of its guardians, both human and animal. The Texas sun rose bright and relentless over Dallas, casting golden rays through the battered but lively halls of the Wildlife Response Center. A week had passed since the attempted break-in, but the shockwaves still pulsed through every staff meeting and whispered conversation. Yet with every day the shadows of fear gave way to a growing sense of unity and purpose, one that would soon be tested at a greater scale. Inside the small office, David Walker and Jenny Harper pored over stacks of evidence flight manifests, customs declarations, blurry security photos, and dozens of shipping records. David's tall, rugged form was hunched forward, blue eyes sharp and weary, his hands moving steadily over files, despite the exhaustion in his broad shoulders. Jenny sat cross-legged in her chair, feet tucked beneath her scribbling notes in her neat, looping handwriting. Her face was paler than usual, but her gray eyes glowed with hope and determination. Between them, Shadow sprawled on the cool tile, his black and tan fur gleaming as he gnawed gently on a rubber ball, every so often, lifting his head to watch the door. Special Agent Whitman, always impeccably professional, even with his suit rumpled from another long night, joined them at the table. His short salt and pepper hair and weathered face lent him a kind of quiet gravity. "The lab matched the suitcase tags to 6 other shipments this month alone," he said, voice low. "Everyone routed through Dallas under the name Global Wild Trust Foundation. Everyone with paperwork certified by a Mr. Frank Morgan." Jenny's eyes narrowed. "He's been using the charity as a front for years, hasn't he?" Whitman nodded, flipping open a dossier. "Morgan is a master of public image. Always on TV at animal welfare galas, slick mid-40s, expensive suits, silver hair, easy smile. But the records are damning unexplained wire transfers, forged shipping documents, and a trail of rare animal disappearances stretching across the Americas." Meanwhile, in the break room, Greg Stanton poured a round of coffee, his burly frame blocking half the counter, as he joked quietly with Dr. Hannah Lee. Greg's own story had spread through the center, his childhood loss, his quiet recovery, and how he now found comfort in simple acts of care. His blue eyes lingered on Jenny with paternal concern before he left her a plate of muffins and a wordless pat on the shoulder. The day's investigation stretched into late afternoon. David and Shadow headed to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, guided by new intel from the FBI. As they walked through the cavernous baggage halls, the air thick with the scent of jet fuel and brewing storms, David's mind raced with the weight of responsibility. Shadow, sensing his partner's tension, walked close, nose low, every muscle alert. They met Sarah Mitchell, the tall, athletic logistics supervisor with cropped chestnut hair by the freight elevator. Sarah's green eyes were tired, but resolute, her brisk professionalism masking the scars of past losses. "I've rerouted the CCTV feeds so you can monitor the cargo loading zones," she told David. "We're going to get them this time." On their second pass through the cargo corridor, Shadow stopped suddenly, body-taut. He sniffed at a stack of sealed wooden crates, then barked a single sharp warning sound. David knelt beside him, prying open the crate under Sarah's supervision. Inside, crammed in tiny cages, were 3 slow-moving pangolins, terrified, dehydrated, but alive. "We've got another batch," David radioed. Whitman, calling animal control and wildlife rescue. Sarah, usually composed, covered her mouth in horror. "Morgan was going to let them die here," she whispered. "Not today," David replied grimly, giving Shadow a proud scratch. As animal rescue teams worked, Sarah slipped away to her office, heart racing. She found an encrypted thumb drive Morgan's team had left behind in a rush, one she'd suspected, but never dared to open. With shaking hands, she plugged it into her terminal. Finding spreadsheets, transfer records, and damning emails, Morgan had coordinated every shipment, every bribe, every forged permit. Sarah's face, usually a mask of careful neutrality, softened with relief, and perhaps a trace of long-awaited vindication. At the Wildlife Response Center, Jenny and Hannah fielded a call from another airport, Houston this time. A suspicious shipment matched the same tags and route. Jenny's empathy, always her greatest strength, shone as she comforted the frightened animals. Rescued that day a young lemur, several rare birds, and a turtle with a fractured shell. Shadow, newly returned, greeted each animal with a nuzzle, lending his calm to their recovery. That evening, under the hum of fluorescent lights, the whole team gathered in the staff room. Whitman made the announcement Morgan's been arrested. The press is calling it the biggest wildlife trafficking bust in Texas history. He gestured to the team. It was the evidence you gathered, David's crate discovery, Jenny's care logs, Sarah's files, that made the case ironclad. Jenny for once let herself lean back and smile. Hannah hugged her. Greg's laughter boomed through the halls. Even Sarah, never one for crowds, joined in the celebration, her eyes glistening with emotion she rarely showed. Shadow, the silent hero, received a special treat, a whole roast chicken. He devoured it on the back porch. Sam, the orange tabby, perched beside him, swatting playfully at his tail. The kittens watched now, stronger and lively, tumbling over each other as they explored their pen. Spring in Texas had a way of painting the world with hope. The rolling prairie near the outskirts of Dallas shimmered with wildflowers, and a fresh breeze played among the young oaks as the sun rose on a day of promise at the Lone Star Wildlife Sanctuary. For weeks the team had prepared for this moment, a farewell not of sorrow, but of fulfillment. 2 bobcat kittens, once little more than shadows of life, now stalked and pounced in the grass, their coats thick and glossy, their eyes alight with mischief and freedom. Jenny Harper watched from the sanctuary's edge, arms folded over the simple green windbreaker that had become her uniform. Her blonde hair danced in the wind, loose and unhurried for the first time in months. The months of sleepless nights, worry, and heartbreak were written softly in the lines at the corners of her eyes. But so was something new, peace and the quiet glow of accomplishment. Shadow sat at her side, noble and calm, his black and tan coat shining in the morning light. The great German shepherd watched the bobcats with the measured gaze of a guardian who understood the gravity of second chances. David Walker approached with the quiet, assured stride of a man who had finally come home to himself. The stress that had hardened his blue eyes and hunched his broad shoulders was replaced now by the easy confidence of someone who had found purpose. In a simple navy shirt and jeans, his rugged features softened by a gentle smile, he stood beside Jenny and touched her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They watched as the bobcats, now sleek, muscular, and full of curiosity, were coaxed from their carriers by Dr. Hannah Lee. The petite veterinarian, whose brown eyes reflected both compassion and tenacity, knelt in the tall grass, her voice low and melodic as she called encouragement. The orange tabby, Sam, perched proudly atop the fence post, tail twitching. His green eyes, once wary, were filled with confidence. He was no longer a stray, but Jenny's devoted companion, his body lean and healthy, thanks to weeks of love and care. Whenever Shadow ventured too close to the bobcat's crate, Sam would chide him with a gentle swat, as if to remind everyone who ruled the roost. Shadow responded with an amused huff, ever the gentleman. A small crowd had gathered staff, sanctuary volunteers, animal lovers from across Dallas, and even local news crews. Greg Stanton, the maintenance man, stood at the back in a crisp plaid shirt, beaming with pride. His big hands were awkward with applause, but his eyes shone as he watched the animals thrive. Mrs. Helen Brooks, stately in a lavender dress and silver bun, handed out lemonade and homemade cookies, her laugh ringing above the chatter. Special Agent Whitman appeared, looking almost out of place in his sharp suit. He approached David and Jenny with a rare smile. "I wanted to see the legends in action, one last time," he said, nodding at Shadow, who met the compliment with a regal wag of his tail. "We're closing the Morgan file today." He pleaded guilty. "You made a difference, don't ever forget that." When it was time, Dr. Hannah gently released the bobcats. The crowd held its breath as the siblings paused, sniffed the wind, and then bounded into the wild underbrush, tails high. Jenny wiped a tear, her smile radiant. "They'll remember this day for the rest of their lives," she whispered. "So will I." Back at the Sanctuary Center, the celebration took on a festive warmth. Children clustered around Shadow, who accepted their hugs and pats with royal patience. The Dallas Morning News snapped his photo for the cover story, and airport staff delivered a framed certificate honoring his heroism and loyalty. Shadow Guardian of Dallas, Fort Worth, the plaque read. Even Sarah Mitchell, tall and reserved as ever, joined the laughter, her usually stern face softening as she offered Shadow a rare treat. For a moment, even she let down her guard, recounting how she had found new courage thanks to the team. David and Jenny, side by side, found themselves the center of quiet congratulations. Their partnership, once forged by necessity and shared danger, had deepened into something enduring. Greg toasted them with sweet iced tea. Dr. Hannah laughed. "If you ever get tired of airport security, you know where to find us, David." Jenny blushed, leaning into David's side. "I think we've both found our calling," she replied, her voice low and sure. As the afternoon faded, the group gathered on the lawn for a final picture. Shadow regal and upright. Sam, eyes half closed in feline satisfaction. Jenny and David, hands entwined. Hannah, Greg, Helen, and Sarah forming a circle around the rescued animals. In the background, the wild Texas sky stretched endless and blue, and the bobcats were just a blur on the horizon, free at last. As twilight deepened, Jenny wandered to the sanctuary's edge with David and Shadow, watching as the land softened into gold. "I never thought life could feel this full," she murmured, her head on David's shoulder. He kissed her temple, gratitude shining in his eyes. "We saved them," he said softly. "But they saved us too." Shadow nosed Jenny's hand as if to agree, then settled at their feet with a satisfied sigh. Sam curled beside him, the unlikely duo finally at peace. The last lines of sunlight glinted off the sanctuary's sign, Lone Star, a haven for all creatures. Laughter and music drifted from the porch behind them, and for a moment, everything felt possible. Old wounds healing, lost souls found, and a future stitched together from courage, kindness, and hope. Sometimes the greatest miracles appear in the smallest, most unexpected moments. A rescued animal's second chance, a stranger's quiet act of courage, a bond formed where there once was only fear. Perhaps these are not coincidences at all, but gentle reminders that God's grace moves quietly among us, guiding hands and healing hearts, even when hope seems lost. In our own lives, we might never know whose life we touch with a simple kindness, or how a single choice can echo far beyond what we imagine. So, if this story has inspired you, please share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to our channel, and help us spread a little more light in the world. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may we all find the courage to protect and cherish every living creature placed in our care. If you believe in the power of compassion and second chances, write Amen in the comments to join our circle of hope.